Support comes from ServiceNow. We're for people doing the creative work they actually want to do. That's why this ad was written and read by a real person and not AI. You know what people don't want to do? Boring, busy work. Now with AI agents built into the ServiceNow platform, you can automate millions of repetitive tasks in every corner of your business, IT, HR, and more, so your people can focus on the work that they want to do. That's putting AI agents to work for people. It's your turn. Visit servicenow.com.
It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
This is The Other Side of Midnight. I'm Frank Morano. Well, I think this was a pretty groundbreaking weekend. The headlines really say it all. If you look at headline after headline, the negotiations that took place between the United States and Iran are being called constructive. Now, when you have one country that is a nuclear power and another country that people fear being a nuclear power, just the fact that there are conversations, I find to be a very positive thing, let alone conversations that are described by anyone as constructive, particularly when they're going to meet again next week. Now, one of the things that I actually give President Trump a lot of credit for, even though a lot of the world portrays him as a madman, is that he's willing to engage diplomatically with pretty terrible regimes, at least the regimes that a lot of Western media views as terrible. Talking about North Korea, talking about Russia, talking about Iran, talking about even Saudi Arabia, although it's not exactly a stretch when it comes to American presidents and Saudi Arabia. But back to Iran. Very interesting piece in Time magazine by Trita Parsi. Trita Parsi's been a guest on this show before. He's an award-winning author and the co-founder and executive vice president of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. If you're not familiar with the Quincy Institute, it's basically a think tank that consists of people on the left and on the right that believe in peace, that believe in détente, that believe in not having perpetual wars everywhere. And I thought his commentary, given Trump's unique position to bring peace to the United States and Iran, was a really interesting one. Dr. Parsi, it's great to have you back on the show. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let me begin, Dr. Parsi, with the skepticism that was expressed by one of my guests a couple of days ago. And when I was talking about what I viewed as a positive development, was expressed by a lot of listeners, and that's about the credibility of Iran. Why should any American believe that Iran can be trusted, especially after years of lying about their nuclear program, funding terrorism, and attacking our allies?
So these agreements never rely upon trust. Trust is not the key thing that makes these things work. It's mechanisms in which you verify what the other side is doing to make sure that they are not lying is what these things rely on. And that is the case here as well. There was a previous deal, and it was the United States that betrayed that deal because Trump left that deal. I'm very pleased that he is now trying to get another deal, that he's negotiating very constructively. But in reality, these two countries don't have any reason to trust each other. They still need to get a deal because both of them are going to be better off having something that prevents them from going to war.
Iran was caught enriching uranium to near weapons-grade levels. How is that compatible with any peaceful intent?
That's not really true. Iran has a right to enrich uranium, and they have been enriching uranium. They have gone up to 60%, which they declared to the IAEA before they did so. So it's not as if they were enriching at 90%, which is what they need to do to build a bomb, and then they were caught red-handed. That's just not simply been the case. However, about 25 years ago, they were doing certain things that are not fully compatible with a peaceful program. And the IAEA noticed this, and that's when this whole crisis began. But that's 25 years ago, and those things were not compatible with a peaceful program, but are not necessarily a weapons program in and of themselves. And see what Tulsi Gabbard said at the center about 2 weeks ago. She's the new director of national intelligence. And she testified that once again, the U.S. intelligence conclusion is that the Iranians are currently not engaged in a weapons program. Now, we have to keep it that way, and that's part of the reason why the deal Trump is trying to get is a good thing.
You write that Iran wants trade and business with the United States. A lot of people view that as disingenuous. A lot of people say that's just a smokescreen for regime survival rather than real reform or moderation. What do you say to those folks who are skeptical about that?
So I don't think this is about moderation at all. I think they need trade because they're not going to be able to continue, they're not going to be able to thrive unless they manage to get U.S. trade. And because the mechanism here is twofold. On the one hand, if you only have sanctions lifted on European companies and Asian companies going into Iran, which is called secondary sanctions, they will simply not go back in because they don't feel that it is safe enough for them if they're doing things that American companies are not doing. If American companies are doing it, well, then they feel much, much safer. Secondly, in order to make sure that the United States keeps its word and doesn't do what happened under Trump, which is that there was a deal and he just walked out of it, it's actually better if you have American companies inside of Iran on the ground because they will be a political force against just, imposing sanctions, lifting sanctions, imposing sanctions, lifting sanctions. It's very cost-free to do so when all you're punishing is European and Chinese companies. But if you're also punishing American companies, then suddenly it becomes a different political calculation. Those are the key reasons why the Iranians now, for the first time, they didn't want this before, actually want to have trade with the U.S.
At 30 minutes after the hour, this is The Other Side of Midnight. My guest is Trita Parsi. He's an award-winning author and the executive vice president of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Dr. Parsi, isn't any deal that doesn't completely dismantle Iran's nuclear infrastructure just buying time for them to go nuclear down the road?
No, because the idea that you can actually completely dismantle the program is disingenuous. If you listen carefully to Bibi Netanyahu, who is the force arguing for dismantlement, you see the stuff that he put in a video just the day after he was visited with Trump saying this would require the U.S. exploding all of the program, and he wants the U.S. to take care of all of this. So pushing for that may sound good, but in reality that option doesn't exist. That option is designed to lead to war. The Israelis have never wanted to see a deal between the U.S. and Iran. They're pushing for this because they know the Iranians will reject it, which then will cause diplomacy to collapse and force Trump to go into yet another unnecessary war in the region.
You say that Trump could get a better deal than Obama got. But wasn't the original Iran nuclear deal toothless when it came to inspections and enforcement? How would this deal or any potential future deal involving Trump and Iran be different than the last one?
Well, so first of all, the previous deal was not toothless at all. It had the most strict inspections that ever have been negotiated. The IAEA was inside of every element of the Iranian nuclear program. So the idea that it was toothless is a common talking point, but it's just simply not true. And it's going to be tough for Trump being able to get back to that level of inspections and that level of restrictions on the Iranian program, precisely because of the fact that since Trump left the deal, the Iranians have dramatically advanced their program. So let me give you an example. When Obama started seriously negotiating the deal, the Iranian breakout time was 12 months. That's the time it would take the Iranians from making a political decision to get to a bomb and then actually having the material for a bomb. Not having a bomb, but having the material for a bomb. That time was 8 weeks when Obama started negotiating the deal. By the time the deal was negotiated and all the restrictions were put on the program, the breakout time has been extended to a minimum of 12 months. Today, Iran's breakout time, because of the advances they have made since Trump left the deal, is about 3 to 5 days. So to get them from 3 to 5 days all the way back to 1 year or even beyond that is going to be challenging. But Trump has a Trump card that he could use, which Obama and Biden did not want to use and didn't dare to use. They weren't even attracted by it, which is to actually lift the primary sanctions, the sanctions that prevent American companies from going into the Iranian market. If he's adding those things on the table as part of the incentives, he can definitely demand more, and perhaps even so much that it pushes the program beyond what Obama managed to do. And the reason why he's open to doing it, because he's never been a huge fan of these sanctions. These sanctions, in his view, tend to punish American companies more so than punishing the actual government of that country. So I think he's quite attracted to the idea of opening this market up for American businesses. It would be the largest market that has actually opened up since the fall of the Soviet Union and Russia. So this gives him a leg up that he can use. I suspect that he's inclined to use it. And if he does, then I think he has decent chances of getting a deal that is stricter than what Obama managed to get.
If you're just tuning in, this is The Other Side of Midnight. I'm Frank Morano. My guest is Dr. Trita Parsi. He's with the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. You can check out his recent piece on these Iran-U.S. Negotiations in Time magazine. And Dr. Parsi, while these talks are happening, Iran is still funding Hezbollah, still funding Hamas and the Houthis, groups that openly call for the destruction of Israel. How do you square that with your push for diplomacy?
Because of the simple fact that at the end of the day, U.S. has to put its own interests first. If the Iranians get to a nuclear weapon, that is a direct threat to the United States. Whereas if the Iranians are engaging those activities that you just mentioned, those are a threat to Israel. Those are a problem for Israel. It is not a direct threat to the United States. That doesn't mean that the U.S. shouldn't care about it, but we have to make priorities that actually put the U.S. first. And in this case, as was the case with Obama's deal, they decided to focus on the nuclear issue because that's what concerns us the most. And listen carefully to what Trump says. He says his only red line is no nuclear weapon. I don't think he's not going to touch those other issues. I'm sure he will. But we have to be very clear that we have to put our own interests first, and our own interest is first and foremost to make sure that the Iranians don't build a nuclear weapon.
Shouldn't negotiations be conditioned on Iran ending its support for terrorism and regional militias first, or do we risk rewarding bad behavior if we don't put that precondition in?
Well, again, it goes back to what I said earlier on. We have to make a choice of what is most important to us. And I definitely recognize there's several people in the U.S. political system that would like to put, some of these other issues ahead of the nuclear issue. But I personally think that Trump does the right thing here by making sure that he put the U.S. interests first. And incidentally, this is also previous governments, administrations did, because as much as those other things are problematic, you need to first deal with the thing that actually is the problem primarily for us, a threat to the United States. And then once you have done that, you have more opportunities to be able to address those other issues. But you got to do first things first. If you try to do everything at once, you will end up getting nothing done.
If the goal is regional peace, how can that be achieved without confronting Iran's missile program and the destabilizing influence that a lot of people believe that they have across the Middle East?
Well, first of all, when it comes to regional peace and some of the other things that they have, there's several other countries in the region that have missile programs. If we want to address the missile program, and then we want to address their issue, their relationship with Hezbollah, and the nuclear issue, those are the three pillars of the Iranian deterrence. That means that there is simply no way they're going to give up all of that without us going to war. Now, if people want to advocate going for war, they should say so. They should not hide behind, the Iranians are doing these bad things over here, we have to address that. The Iranians are doing that over here, we have to address that, without actually leveling with the American people. What that means, if we're trying to do all of those different things. If these are the three pillars of their deterrence, if you take away one of them, the two other ones are going to become more important for them. And we have to ask ourselves, okay, which pillar of deterrence that the Iranians have can we not afford to live with? And which are the ones that are less important, even though we may not like them, we will be able to live with that, although we should always try to find some other forms of restrictions on them. And that goes back to the fact that once you actually game this out, there's just no question about it. You got to focus on the nuclear issue.
The #1 selling product of its kind with over 20 years of research and innovation. Botox Cosmetic, onabotulinum toxin A, is a prescription medicine used to temporarily make moderate to severe frown lines, crow's feet, and forehead lines look better in adults.
Effects of Botox Cosmetic may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness may be a sign of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Don't receive Botox Cosmetic if you have a skin infection. Side effects may include allergic reactions, injection site pain, headache, eyebrow and eyelid drooping, and eyelid swelling. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Tell your doctor about medical history, muscle or nerve conditions including ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects. For full safety information, visit BotoxCosmetic.com or call 877-351-0300.
See for yourself at BotoxCosmetic.com.
Faraday presenta Ojos con Alergia y Picazón contra el jardinero. Y el ganador es Faraday Extra Fuerte. Para aliviar la picazón de los ojos por alergia, actúa más rápido y supera a Claritin y Flonase aún a las 24 horas. Faraday, adelante.
Impact confirmed. The Slayer has been activated.
Demonic threat level increasing.
Hold the line!
All the power of hell cowering before one man.
id Software presents Doom: The Dark Ages. Available May 15th on Xbox Series X and S, PlayStation 5, and PC. Pre-order now.
Rated M for mature.
This episode is brought to you by Principles. Ray Dalio, legendary investor and New York Times best-selling author, wants to pass along his understanding of how countries go broke, because he believes the U.S. budget and debt situation needs to be addressed. To give you that knowledge, he has put the draft of his book, How Countries Go Broke: The Big Cycle, online for free. It's available now at economicprinciples.org.
You mentioned Israel a couple of times. Do you think that Netanyahu's assessment that Iran's nuclear program must be dismantled, not inspected, is wrong? Or is it just inconvenient for your preferred strategy, which is diplomacy?
No, it's because his preferred strategy is to get the United States into another war in the Middle East. So he's putting forward deliberately conditions that he knows will not work and will cause Trump's diplomacy to fail, and then corner Trump into having to take military action because he has said that if he doesn't get a deal, he's going to take action. That is what the Israelis have done for more than 25 years. By now, we should be smart enough to understand it. And my understanding, based on my conversations inside this administration, is that they do get it. And that's part of the reason when Trump summoned Netanyahu to the White House, you heard Netanyahu say things such as Libya model, dismantlement. Trump did not repeat that at all in front of the cameras, nor did he commit to that behind the cameras. Because he's looked at it and he's realized what is our interest and what is Israel's interest. Israel should be commended for pursuing its own interests. If I were Israel, I would have done probably the same thing as Netanyahu does. But the President of the United States has to, first and foremost, prioritize America's interests, not any other country's interests.
Is it appropriate for the U.S. to pursue a deal that both Israel and most of our Sunni Arab allies oppose so strongly? Why risk those alliances for Iran?
Actually, that is no longer true. It was true 10 years ago. Saudi Arabia and the UAE were both opposed to the nuclear deal. Incidentally, the rest of the world was in favor of it. So just singling out those three countries, none of which we actually have a treaty alliance with, at the expense of all of the other countries that the U.S. actually have either alliances or partnerships with, I think is first and foremost wrong. But we have actually in a different situation. The only country that opposes this right now is Israel. The Saudis are supporting. The UAE have even tried to play a role in the mediation. They're the ones who delivered Trump's letter to the Iranians. They've been hoping that the talks actually will be hosted by them in Emirates rather than Oman. So this idea that everyone else is against it is just completely flat out wrong. Two of the countries who were against it are now in favor, and the only remaining opponent is the Israelis.
You've been very generous with your time, and I know it's late. I'm going to let you go in a minute, but this is pretty important, so bear with me for 2 more minutes here. You seem in your column pretty optimistic about Trump's role. And so far, for the last 15 minutes, our whole conversation has centered on the United States perspective in this whole deal. But let's talk about Iran's perspective, right? Trump ordered the killing of Qasem Soleimani and walked away from the last deal. Why would Iran negotiate seriously with him now?
That's a great question. And this is part of the reason why in that article I actually have been quite optimistic, because I've seen that the two sides are just so much more mature and understanding of their own predicaments and their opportunities that I did not expect to see, to be frank with you, at least not this early and not this quickly. The Iranians understand that, yes, this is an extremely unpopular regime. It is corrupt. It is mismanaging the economy. The situation is very bad. But I don't think that is the key reason they're doing this, because a very bad economic and political situation does not in and of itself create a risk for regime change or upheaval or revolution internally. Because you need so many other ingredients. You need a competent opposition. You need strong leadership. You need an ideology. You need a political vision. All of that is currently missing. And it's been missing for some time. That's why a regime as incompetent and corrupt and unpopular as the Iranian regime has been able to survive for so long, because the alternatives are simply not there. But survival is not enough. Iran needs to thrive. The rest of the region is going way ahead of Iran. Turkey has smaller economy than Iran 20 years ago. Now it has a much larger economy. It's part of the G20. The Saudis are changing their society from inside, opening it up, focusing on AI and an IT economy. I don't need to explain to anyone how Dubai and Doha looks like today. And these were desert cities 50 years ago. Iran cannot continue like this. Just surviving. They're making it, whereas it has the potential to really thrive. But to do so, it needs to make sure that it ends this enmity with the United States. It needs to come to terms with the United States. And there's an opportunity now, because Trump is the guy who's actually willing to make deals, unlike Biden, who, according to his own U.S. envoy to Iran, Rob Malley, in the New York Times 2 days ago, was only lukewarm about this idea. Getting a deal with Iran. So he's the guy who can make it happen. And now in Iran, you also have a president and a foreign minister that has been pushing very hard to make this happen. If it occurs and if it ends up being a good deal, I think it actually would be completely revolutionary for the entire region.
I'm fighting a losing battle against your cell phone signal here, so I'll make this the last question, and I'll let you get to sleep. Why I think everybody wants peace with Iran. Every American wants peace with Iran. I guess the big question is how to go about that. There are some that think the path to doing that is diplomatic engagement with the mullahs and the current regime that's in charge. And then there are other people that think that the approach is to support the Iranian people fighting for freedom and democracy and an alternative to the current theocratic regime. Why do you, and not just you, but a lot of others, seem more eager to negotiate with the Islamic Republic than to support dissidents within Iran?
The dissidents within Iran are not asking for military support from the United States. They're not even asking for other kinds of support. So you have dissidents on the outside who are asking for American support, but they have almost zero credibility inside the country, and they don't have that leadership, that competence, that vision that I mentioned earlier on. There's one of them that is an armed resistance, but he was actually on the U.S. terrorist list up until 10 years ago, and should frankly never have been taken off because they killed plenty of Americans. And they've done nothing to actually renounce terrorism and violence, but they ran a very effective lobbying game in Washington, and they managed to get off the list thanks to Hillary Clinton. So it isn't so that you actually have a really amazing democratic alternative and it would be better for us to support them. If that was the picture, then many people would probably think somewhat differently about the situation. But that is not the picture. There is no such opposition that the U.S. really can support, or an opposition that actually wants America's support, because America's support in that region is not necessarily always a blessing.
Trita Parsi, we're going to have to end it there. People can check out your latest column in Time Magazine, or just check out your regular commentary at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. It is a fascinating think tank, and people can check it out at quincyinst.org. That's quincyinst.org. Trita Parsi, it's always thought-provoking, always engaging. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Appreciate it. If you want to comment on any portion of our conversation, you're welcome to give me a call. My phone number is 646-720-0635. That's 1-646-720-0635. This is The Other Side of Midnight. Straight ahead.